Thank you all for this wonderful opportunity for me to share a bit of my research with all of you. I am going to speak today to this broader theme of transformations of figures and themes in Buddhist literature by looking at how certain figures in Indian and Chinese Buddhist literature are represented on devotional scrolls that were very important in the early Shin Buddhist community. So I will start first by making a short introduction to Shinran. And I have pressed the button, but the screen is not moving. And it may be, I have created a PowerPoint with a great many images, so it's probably a little heavy, so it may take some time to move to the next screen. And I'll just make a very brief introduction to Shinran, who is revered as the founder of Jodo Shinshu, or the true school of Pure Land Buddhism, or the Pure Land Buddhism as the true centerpiece of the Buddhist tradition. He encountered Honen and became a Pure Land adherent, a practitioner of the Nembutsu, and reinterpreted Honen's teaching such that hearing this phrase, Namu Amida Butsu, or I bow down before Amitabha, immeasurable light. He held that that was the key for us to attain the insight, the transformative insight that is the centerpiece of Buddhist enlightenment. And he spread that teaching primarily in Eastern Japan in the 13th century. And today we're going to look at a few of the images that his communities and that he encouraged his followers to create, and that were quite important, especially in the first few hundred years after he passed away, in the small communities that followed in his teachings. And these devotional images are referred to as komyo honzon, or objects of reverence centered on light. And these are, I'll show you several pictures of them later, but in the center, there is a phrase, Namu Amida Butsu. If you all remember the opening gongyo, the service that we held, the chanters sat before a phrase with several Chinese characters on it, which is a Chinese translation of the term Namu Amida Butsu, a Chinese reiteration of the term Namu Amida Butsu. And you'll notice, actually, these komyo honzon are very similar to that central object of reverence that was used during our service earlier today. And it's also likely, in these komyo honzon, there are lineages and teachings that were both images, pictures of patriarchs and people who are important in bringing the tradition to Shinran in Japan, and also words, phrases from their teachings that were presented on these large scrolls that were kept in gathering places and displayed in gathering places. And it's likely that these images were used as visual aids for teaching followers about the basic teachings of the tradition. And my hope today is to first show you the oldest existent komyo honzon, which is on the screen here right now. There is these switching is a little bit slow, but you can see this is the oldest existent komyo honzon, which was created while Shinran was still alive and is currently held at Myogenji, a temple in sort of south central Japan that has a lot of really very important old treasures from the earliest days of the Shin Buddhist community. And this was likely created under the direction of Shinran. As you can see here in the middle, there is this phrase, Namu Fukashigi Ko Nyorai, which is sort of a mixed transliteration and translation of the term Namu Amida Butsu, or I bow down before Amitabha Buddha, which is translated here as I bow down before the Tathagata of inconceivable light. And this light, you can see there are rays of light radiating from that central image. And this central image is in the Shin Buddhist tradition taken to be sort of the central expression of Shakyamuni's enlightenment. And so it's treated as a Buddha, and it's seated on a lotus flower as one expression of Buddhahood, one expression of the essence of Buddhahood, or the essence of enlightenment. And then in this Nyogenji specimen, there are two other scrolls that would be hung to the left and right of the central image. On the left side, we have images of both the sort of mythical Bodhisattva Seishi, Dai Seishi, who appeared, I cannot unfortunately pronounce the Sanskrit name, that also appeared in the previous presentation, as well as Nagarjuna Vasubandhu at the bottom of the screen here. The center here is Dai Seishi, and then above them are Chinese patriarchs who were instrumental in clarifying the significance of this teaching regarding Namu Amida Butsu and the Pure Land teachings as a whole. And then we have on the right scroll, Prince Shotoku, who was held to be instrumental in introducing Buddhism into Japan, as well as Genshin, who Shinran reveres as the first Japanese patriarch of the tradition, who was very influential in popularizing Pure Land Buddhism in Japan. And then Shinran's direct teacher, Honen, who advocated this exclusive reliance on the Nembutsu as the best and only path to Buddhahood, as well as Shinran and two of Honen's disciples. And then above and below on each of these scrolls, we have different passages from Buddhist literature, different quotations from Buddhist literature. One on the top here is a quotation from the Sutra of Immeasurable Life, the sutra that describes Amitabha and the nature of both his awakening and his vows. We also have phrases from Vasubandhu's work down here, Vasubandhu's work here, and then an important Chinese patriarch, Tanlan, and Shandao above on the left-hand scroll, and then on the right-hand scroll, below here on this middle scroll, we have a passage by Shinran himself, a passage from one of Shinran's most important poems. And then below here is a passage from the work of Seikaku, one of Shinran's brother disciples under Honen, and above is a passage from Honen's primary work. These also contain passages from Genshin's works and references to Shotoku Taishi. And the standard form for the Komyo Honzon is generally this format. We have the central object of reverence, flanked on two sides by the patriarchs in the Indian tradition, and then the transmission to Japan, starting with Prince Shotoku and then going through down to Shinran. And in the later representations, these are filled in more on the right side. There's a continued, lineage here after Shinran. But since this was created while Shinran was alive, it ends with Shinran here. But I would like to also mention, I did mention that Shinran, he sanctioned or encouraged the creation of this Komyo Honzon. That there is also at Myogenji notations from him, some of his writing commenting upon the different phrases, the different quotations from Buddhist literature that appear on the scroll. And again, I'm having trouble shifting the screen here. There you just saw for a second the passage that I was hoping to show you. Shinran has left several different commentaries that he has a text entitled here it is, the Songo Shinzo Meimon, which you can see here, the Songo Shinzo Meimon, which essentially is a commentary on the phrases that appear on these different objects of reverence that are centered around these the name of Amida Buddha. And here, the opening passage of the Songo Shinzo Meimon is a quote from the larger sutra, and it actually a quote from the 18th vow in the larger sutra, which is seen to be sort of the centerpiece of liberation, the centerpiece of the working of Amida in the world to liberate us in the Pure Land tradition. And he is commenting, Shinran is commenting in this last line here. He begins his commentary on that passage, and you can see that passage also appears in the upper right-hand corner of the scroll that I was just showing you. And unfortunately, this Myogenji, although it's the oldest specimen of its type, it is not necessarily entirely representative of the way that the form was developed later on. And I'd like to just, since we have only a bit of time, I'd like to move on here and introduce a more standard format and a more standard view that may give you a better understanding of what these Komyo Honzon were and how they functioned in the Shin community. And here, this is a particularly well-preserved specimen from the mid-15th century, so about 200 years after Shinran passed away. That's held here in Kyoto at Sairenji, which is Otani temple at this time, but was likely associated with Bukkoji-ha, which was founded by one of Shinran's disciples and has a long tradition as well. And you can see here, again, we have the central image, the same Namu Fuka Shigi Ko Nyorai as the central image, but it's flanked now on both sides by other representations of the name. Here is the most familiar Namu, Amida Butsu, and then on the right side is this Kimyo Jinji Po Muge Ko Nyorai, which is the same phrase that was on the scroll in our chapel here on campus. And you can see here that these historical personages are all sort of now floating in Amida's light, and they're all included on this one single very large scroll, this one single very large scroll that's almost 2 meters high and about 1 meter across. And as with the initial specimen, you can see that there are quotations from Buddhist literature, from scripture above and below. The ones below are all quotations from the larger sutra, from the Sutra on Immeasurable Life. The ones above are quotations from the important figures who are depicted on the screen. And my hope is to just show you, just run through very quickly what each of those figures look like. And unfortunately, the computer is not being very cooperative with my hope for speed. But in any case, there are other formats than this one that I am showing you today. But on the whole, we can see, history, the history of the tradition shown up in Amida's light, and always sort of surrounded by text, right? And so these, they not only provide an image of the patriarchs, an image of the people who brought this teaching to Japan and brought this teaching to Shinran and brought this teaching to whatever particular temple or place to listen to the Dharma where they are on the wall. They speak to that lineage, and they also give us insight into what the teachings that these people held to be important are. And I will again maybe switch here. And I would like to, and I guess we can say, as we're waiting for this to shift, in general, they also all keep the same format of, having the Indian patriarchs below, the Chinese patriarchs above on the right, Prince Shotoku on the left, Prince Shotoku on the right, and then having the Japanese Pure Land patriarchs above Prince Shotoku. I will maybe skip this because we're running low on time, and I'd like to maybe take a look at the passages from the larger sutra and see how it is that they depict these different figures, what it is that it's having these different figures on the scroll say. And the first, and perhaps one of the most important and interesting ones, is this representation of Shakyamuni, the representation of the historical Buddha Shakyamuni, saying that he appeared in the world in order to clarify and open up the teaching of the path, to give them true and real benefit. And Shinran interprets this to mean give them the true and real benefit of the teaching of the original vow. So here, this can be said to be a representation of Shakyamuni's reason for appearing in the world, to give us the teachings of the original vow. And then in the next image, we have Amida, who is on the left side of the central image here. And again, we're having trouble switching slides, but Amida is presented above this lower register of text. And in the text, we are given what Shinran held to be the three most important of Amida's vows, which again, I've asked to go forward maybe 3 or 4 times here, and it's still not going forward. So we're going to jump at some point. And I guess then on the next quotations from the larger sutra on the same lower register, they speak to the way in which the vow works in the world to liberate sentient beings. And it's really quite frustrating that this is not working very well. But oh, and here we can see I have listed up the the 4 vows of Amida that are listed on the scroll, and then these 2 ways, these 2 passages from the larger sutra, or the Sutra on Immeasurable Life, that describe how it is that we are, through the working of that original vow, led to attain enlightenment, and led to attain enlightenment through the natural working out of the vow in the world. And we can see, is it maybe that I'm not using this correctly? And I'd like to now move up to the upper, the sort of up on the scroll, to look at the historical persons. They're depicted on the scroll, and I really can only give you just a very, very brief picture of these people. All these on the bottom are the Indian patriarchs, and above are the Chinese patriarchs, with Bodhi Rishi, who traveled from India to China and was Tanlan's teacher, who translated Vasubandhu's treatise on the Pure Land, and who led Tanlan to become a Pure Land monk. And then Tanlan's not direct disciple, but disciple Dao Cho, and Shan Dao, who was a disciple of Dao Cho. And then 3 later Chinese thinkers who followed in Shan Dao's teachings. And I guess one thing, since we are talking about how Indian figures were presented in Japan, one quite interesting thing about the way that Vasubandhu and Nagarjuna are presented on these scrolls is that they are presented as bodhisattvas, sort of somewhere between a human and a supernatural being. You can see that they have the skin pigment of human beings, but they have all the accoutrements of the sort of supernatural bodhisattvas who appear in the sutras. And I really cannot, I'm sort of running out of the time allotted to me, and cannot really speak very much about each of these different images. But on the right side, we can see, I just showed you Prince Shotoku and his retinue, people from Korea, and his teachers, his Buddhist teachers from Korea, and his other supporters from Korea, and also supporters in Japan are down on the bottom. And then above Prince Shotoku, I can only show you here Prince Shotoku's face here. And above that is this tradition, this lineage going through from Genshin and Honen, who are seated on chairs. They get the chairs because they're particularly revered. And then Honen's disciples and Shinran. And then beyond Shinran, I guess I should just maybe flip through Honen's disciples, Shinran's brother disciples of Honen. And then here we can see Shinran, and this image, you notice they all have their names next to them. And the fact that Shinran's name is worn off here is evidence of the fact that this was used in teaching, that people were pointing likely with some sort of a stick at this image and saying, this is Shinran, this is Shinran. And in him getting pointed out, that wore away the paint where his name was. We see Shinbutsu, who is important in this Bukkoji lineage, and who was actually the author of the text on the scrolls that I showed you at the beginning. He's the person who wrote the quotations in the Myogenji scroll. And then his followers in this Bukkoji lineage are all depicted down through time. And, I've also prepared the translations of the text that are included that link to each of the figures on the scroll. And we'll go, I'll just show you them from the right of the scroll to the left of the scroll. And really, they go from the right to the left, but that's sort of going backwards in time. And it starts with an image from, again, some screen shifting problems here, an image from Honen, and the phrases by Honen here, speaking about how, that faith, what Professor Inoue was speaking of as faith, the importance of faith as the key for us to enter into nirvana. Then a quote from Shinran, a quote from Genshin, a quote from Shotoku Taishi's sort of how do you say, biography, or it's actually a quote from an inscription on a box unearthed at his mausoleum. But in any case, quote is speaking to how Shotoku Taishi introduced the teachings. And then we really need to speed up here to go just sort of skip through the Chinese patriarchs. And just in closing, what I'd like to say about the Indian patriarchs is that they're represented on this screen as those who take refuge in Amida, as those who, bow down before Amida, as those who are followers of the Nembutsu. Vasubandhu's quote is from the first line of his treatise on the Pure Land, which says, "O world, honor one eye with single mind, take refuge in the Tathagata of light, unhindered in the 10 directions, and aspire to be born in the country of peace and bliss." So this figure in Buddhist literature, a patriarch who is held to be one of the most important philosophers of Buddhism, who's held to be an important patriarch in several of the different schools of Buddhism as they were presented or transmitted into Japan, is presented on this scroll as a follower of the Nembutsu, as is Nagarjuna, who is, of course, the father of Mahayana philosophy. But when he's transformed and presented on this scroll, he's presented as one who takes refuge in Amida, and who is, taking refuge in Amida. And unfortunately, again, I've skipped now here to, maybe, oh no, all the way to the end. Here's Nagarjuna saying, I take refuge in, I continuously remember this Buddha, because when one can think upon the power of this Buddha's virtues, one immediately enters into the definitely settled. And this is a phrase that is present in Nagarjuna's work. It's a quotation from Nagarjuna's work, but it's pulled out from his huge corpus of work and held to be the most important thing that he said for those who are members of this tradition. And so I'm sorry I've taken up too much time, but I very much appreciate your attention and have come to the end of my slides, so I will stop speaking. Thank you very much.